one of the challenges of webinars is people often feel a level of fear or discomfort, perhaps because of the technology, or perhaps because they've been on webinars before that have not floated their boat, not been what's good for them. So I think it's really important that people make emotional connections with the speaker, the host, the presenter, and get that rapport built, so that reduces the fear, reduces the adrenaline and cortisol that's not good for learning, and perhaps increases some of the, perhaps a bit of oxytocin, and some of the more relaxing hormones that are going to help with learning. So I think that whole bonding with people, getting people to know each other, getting them to understand the host, and the host being very much part of the program is really, really important. And then I think one of the things that often gets missed out on webinars is that kind of appeal to the multiple senses, because we kind of lose some of the senses by being on a webinar. We can't, well, you may be able to see people, but you can't always see the other people. You can perhaps see the host on video, or perhaps the person who's talking, but you don't get that very multi-sensory experience you have in a full classroom. People tend to be sitting down. So it's about what you can do to make it more multi-sensory. So one thing you can do is change the language you use. So by using multi-sensory language, the effect that has in our brain is almost the same as if we were experiencing real sensations. So for instance, students who were asked to touch velvet and wood and sandpaper and things, they noticed what parts of their brain, they measured what parts of their brain lit up when they were experiencing these sensations. But then they noticed that when people use similar language, you know, rough, smooth, soft, silky, those similar parts of the brain were engaged again. So changing the language you use can be really important for multisensory. There's a chap called Roger Corville in the States who's great on webinars, and one of the things he says is sometimes make the screen blank. Encourage people to listen to the voices that are there rather than be distracted by the visuals, because our visuals do distract. They're very strong. We have a very large visual cortex, so what's visual we tend to pay attention to. So sometimes just go blank and use the power of sound and of listening. Conversely, whereas we're often trying to say let's get rid of death by PowerPoint, and I totally agree, but actually more images rather than fewer and more changing images will keep people engaged in a webinar. So that's one way of kind of perhaps bringing in the senses. And then there's always the problem of cognitive overload, the idea that we need to get in as much as we possibly can to share lots and lots of data. So again, try to avoid that. What the evidence says is that by using slides that have words on them, a lot of words, if you speak the same, if you effectively read the slides, you're actually creating cognitive overload in the auditory channel. So good learning design says, have some pictures and images, but speak the words separately, make those different. Give people a chance to absorb. So on a webinar, it can be very tempting if you're the host to keep talking, keep going, because it can feel a bit strange if you allow for silence. But actually allowing pauses, let people hear the questions, give them a bit of time to reflect on the questions before they perhaps come into the chat window. Give them that time for information to begin to sink in. I think the structure in terms of cognitive overload is really important. So giving the big picture at the beginning, helping people see where they're going to get to, structuring it really well so they can see how that webinar is going to flow through that kind of virtual classroom environment. Repeating things is absolutely fine, and giving people opportunities to test their learning, ask questions of the learners, the people who are on the webinars. And storytelling, it works all the time, doesn't it, in terms of minimizing cognitive overload. So use stories to give the information in a way that makes it much easier for people to understand. And making connections to their own situations, so making connections to what is real for people, using examples that they might use, using metaphors that they might use, picking up on the metaphors from the other learners. I think all those things can help in terms of reducing the cognitive overload, because people can then build on the links to what they already know. And one last tip that I think is a really helpful one, and I think it works on webinars as well as anywhere else, is to use guessing. as a way of helping people to remember. There's some really nice research that shows that if you ask people to guess the answer to something, even if they get the answer wrong, so long as you supply the correct answer within a short space of time, their long-term retention is better. So again, there's some really good ideas around how you can help people retain their information for longer.